blood burst out from the lips of the impaled assassin, and Antares watched, bewildered, as each drop of blood halted in the air. Then, they began turning into red frost crystals that hovered around the white-haired figure, whose hand had turned into the frost crystal pillar that had impaled the figure. "If you plan on bringing an end to his life, you might as well lay down yours too." The ice-cold, emotionless words rang out through Vlan's being, each word bitingly cold. He watched as the frozen blood of his transformation turned into sharp bullets that pierced through him. In an instant, his head was turned into a sieve, but instead of pain, he felt numb, a numbness that emanated from the crystal impaling his chest and slowly spread across his body. It was cold, but silent, incredibly silent, with no pain, and soon enough, his entire body turned into cold statue, before the breeze blew and he was turned into frosty ashes that dispersed along with it. Painlessly, he was wiped out of the world. Congratulations on defeating a pseudo-eternal stage expert. Rewards? Plus 200,000 EXP. The system notification flashed as the crystallized pillars of ice on Ryuk's hands shattered into pieces before they erupted into frost flakes that gently dispersed into the wind. His gaze was fixed on the distance, where he could see two figures quickly escaping. He simply watched them fleeing farther and farther before he turned his gaze away and towards Antares instead. "Good to see you're all right," he said, as Antares' axe disappeared, leaving just his gauntlets as he took steps toward Ryuk. "You've awakened from your cultivation," he replied. He had watched Ryuk remain in that frosty world for about a month now, and had seen the entire island covered in snow. It was a sign of being on a critical threshold of cultivation, and he didn't interrupt it. "I have, but I never expected to wake up to the sight of pseudo-eternal idiots disturbing the peace," he said as Antares shrugged. "They're just spies sent to probe the island to see if you're really here. They must have gotten the info somehow but needed to be sure, hence these idiots. I've stopped them from ever stepping on the land, but now that two of them have seen you and escaped, I'm afraid they'll finally get the proof that you indeed are here," Antares said with furrowed brows, as Ryuk's gaze shimmered with frosty light before he replied. "Don't hold back. Ha! Don't hold back. Anyone who points their blade at you in this world and harbors killing intents, then don't hold back. Go all out, and leave their survival to their ability. If they point their blade at you, they were never on my side to begin with, so don't hold back for fear of killing one of my own." "They're not," Ryuk said, but it was petrifying to Antares. It wasn't a voice filled with anger or resentment. It was cold and filled with nothing, as if Ryuk was merely stating facts. "I understand," he replied, as Ryuk nodded his head before turning his back and resuming his walk toward the island. Antares followed, and he was about to say something when, dring, the sound of ringing echoed out as Ryuk's device appeared in his hand. His gaze tightened slightly when he saw a bubbling notification at the side that revealed he had 768 missed calls. But then his hand moved toward the call button, and he swiped it to the side. "Astralaxia," he said into the phone, followed by a faint rattling. Then the words, "Ryuk? Ryuk? Yes, it's me," he replied curtly. "Oh my, I've been trying to reach you for close to 5 weeks now, but no reply. You made me worried," she said. "Was in seclusion, so didn't notice it," he replied shortly, as silence followed for a long while, before her voice rang out again. "You sound cold," she whispered, and Ryuk's brow creased. "Do I?" he asked, then got his answer when he watched Antares nodding his head at him from the side, and he could only shrug. "Must be due to me just exiting my frost cultivation. The frost is cold, you know," he said, as a faint "oh" escaped Astralaxia's lips. "I thought you were mad at me," she said, and Ryuk shrugged. "And why would I be?" "I don't know. Maybe because you didn't pick up my calls for 4 weeks. For weeks. I just told you. It was because I was in seclusion. And after your impromptu leaving just before the commemoration party, I had to deal with so many headaches trying to give an excuse to the Alliance and the entire world for the reason of your absence. Yet mere minutes later, we got the footage of you bursting into the Titan Forge and..." Aster was saying when Ryuk suddenly interrupted. We? He asked, and she paused. Who's we? Astralaxia? Ryuk said, as silence enveloped the call before it was broken. I mean, I and the Starweave organization and the Ascension Alliance group and all the higher-ranking groups, and the entire world got the footage of you bursting uninvited into the Titan Forge and coming out with a lady. And that was a clear abduction footage. Ryuk paused in his steps, his brows nodding. You sound like you believe that. Maybe if you had picked up the calls after I saw that footage and explained yourself instead of 4 weeks later, then I would have had a good excuse to the world and canceled out the stain on your reputation. It's not just about you anymore, Ryuk. You are the supreme weave of the organization, the horned hero that End-Earth looked up to as a source of hope. But now, there's nothing but vicious speculation all over the news about you, and that's with rightful reasons and not a single word from you to clear your name. The organization's reputation is plummeting to the ground, all due to your childish actions. Astralaxia shouted, her voice a mix between anger and frustration. Yet Ryuk's gaze remained as cold as ever, before he replied with a single word that shook Aster to her core. Disband the Starweave organization? Ryuk's cold voice rang out, and in Grade B, silence enveloped the dim office room, as Aster's eyes widened in unbelievable shock. Her lips trembled, trying to form suitable words, but she was incapable before she forced a repeat. What did you just say? I said to disband the Starweave organization, he repeated, resuming his walk. Disband the organization? What the? Have you gone insane? No. Then why? Why would you ask to disband the Starweave organization? It is the medium by which information is passed across all opened null portals. Not only that, it's the only reason the evacuation of people from affected null regions is being done alongside the cleanups. It saves millions of lives. Why would you want an organization like that to be disbanded? Because it has outlasted its use? Ryuk said, as Aster clicked her tongue. The Starweave organization was your attempt to fulfill my last wishes after you took my disappearance for death. I understand that, and I appreciate it. But now, I see it's starting to blind you from other things. You don't serve the Ascension Alliance, or any of End-Earth's top factions, nor End-Earth as a whole. The deal is between you, Astralaxia, and me, Ryuk. But I sense you're now starting to worry about image and reputation. That's straying away from what your focus should be on. Besides, we no longer need End-Earth and its armies anymore. They don't need to have information passed to them anymore. The Ascension Alliance and all other top-ranking organizations have outlasted their usefulness, too. They all won't be needed in the upcoming Null invasion. We're enough. And by we, I mean you and me. So disband. You have gone insane, Aster replied, but Ryuk only shrugged. Maybe do what I tell you to do first and then come to me. Then you'll see if I'm insane or not. The spies of the Ascension Alliance group have gotten their hands on my location. I'm sure with your connections you should also be getting news on it. Once you disband the organization, then come to me. And that reminds me, if there's anyone you like amongst those in the Ascension Alliance or any top factions, then tell them not to come to my island. None of them who come to disturb the peace will return alive. I've tagged them as useful before because of their strength in the future Null invasions. But now, they're nothing but a nuisance, so I won't care if they live or die. I'll be waiting for you, Aster. No. Ryuk, wait. Beep. The sound of beeping rang out as Aster's blue eyes locked onto the screen. She quickly tapped it, cracks forming from how much force she exerted with her fingertips. She redialed the number, but then, the connection has been severed. This must be due to the destruction of the end device. The AI voice rang out as Aster clicked her tongue. Her device crumbled into nothing in her hands before. Boom! A shocking aura burst out from her form, winging away all the tables and air as the grass of the skyscraper roof was blown to pieces. Everything in the room flung off into the sky violently. Step! The sound of hurried footsteps rang out as a figure rushed in through the doors, one other than Jack, who looked at the scene before him in shock. watching as the blue hair flapped violently along with a suffocating aura. "Peak wave, Aster?" he called out, as the incessant flapping continued before Aster lowered to the ground, the aura stopping, although the air kept rushing in from the broken glass. "Leave!" Crack! The ground beneath Ryuk shattered into nothing as the area revealed a frozen ice lake, and he wordlessly tossed the device into the cold water before resuming his walk, unperturbed. "If by Aster you mean the lady you refer to as your business partner, then I think that was quite cold," Antares said. "She called you for 4 months and got no reply. It's understandable if she lashes out. Asking her to disband her organization due to anger is too far-fetched." Ryuk halted in his walk before he turned to him. "Do I look angered, Antares?" Ryuk asked with a smile, and Antares hesitated slightly. Looking at Ryuk, who was currently smiling, Antares couldn't sense even the faintest trace of anger in his words. He looked utterly unperturbed by what was happening, carrying a faint aura of someone who no longer cared, as if he was beyond everything. You don't," he admitted as Ryuk nodded and resumed walking. "But your decisions and actions sound like those of an angered man. You don't need the power of the entire world? Are you saying you, along with Aster, are enough to deal with the next Null invasion? I mean, I've watched the news these couple of weeks and saw how dangerous the last Null War was. There were 2 Null Kings, each around the mid or even peak eternity stage, that appeared in 2 different locations. I know you have me and Rakshaw and your pets, along with Aster, to help you, but the 7th Null invasion, according to what I know, will be even worse. We could easily expect up to 5 Null Kings and close to hundreds of thousands of Nulls in 2 or 3 different portals all around Endearth. You've gathered a strong group, Ryuk. But are you sure you do not need this world's help anymore? Can you evacuate the people that quickly? Can you face an entire evil army all alone?" Antares asked with skepticism in his voice as Ryuk found a smile making its way toward him. "You know, Antares, if it were me before my cultivation, I would have been a tad bit disappointed. Disappointed that you have no belief in me," he said, and Antares quieted down. "But now, it's absolutely fine for you to be skeptical. Perhaps if you were me, you would see and understand my reasoning, but you're not me. But soon enough, perhaps, you will understand why I feel this world's factions are no longer needed. Then, maybe your doubts will be dispelled. For now, I'll be returning to the Void Rift to continue my cultivation, and I need a favor from you," Ryuk said as he turned to look at Antares. "And what's the favor? Help me maintain the peace on the island. If you feel you can no longer handle it, then inform Void or Isha. They can get access to me and wake me up in that case. I'll deal with things myself then. Can you do that for me, Antares?" "I'll try," he said, prompting a firm nod from Ryuk. "That would be enough," Ryuk replied. Then, turning back, the Void Rift opened in an instant, and he stepped in, disappearing. He spent a month cultivating his frost energy, and now he's back to cultivating his void energy. Antares muttered to himself as he looked at his hands and clenched them tightly. "Perhaps it's time I take my cultivation seriously, too. I've been given a second chance now. This time, let me see how far this potential of mine can truly take me." When Ryuk appeared in the Void Rift, his eyes swept over the surroundings, seeing the floating graves and the suspended platforms, which still held the dried paint of his blood. But his gaze betrayed no emotion as he floated toward the platform and got into the cultivation stance, his lips widening again. Then, the void cultivation immediately began. When he dove into his body, he saw that he had already created all the nodes successfully, and now all that was required of him was to keep absorbing void energy and form the void runes. Once the void runes were formed, all that would be left was linking all the nodes to a void core on his chest, and that would signal the mark of completing the first stage of void cultivation. Without any more thinking, he began cultivating the void energy. But this time, it spun even faster as Ryuk activated his void energy to bolster his cultivation speed. The bolstering increased his ability to absorb void energy into him and sped up his cultivation by close to 3 times its normal speed. But in return, It brought about close to 6 times the pain as Ryuk's eyes squeezed shut. It stung. It stung badly, and that was why he hated every second of him cultivation void energy. Because it always came with great pain, but he had no choice but to go through the pain. So far it doesn't kill me. Then it's fine, he thought as he silently continued his cultivation. Times passed by rapidly, and soon, a cocoon of glowing void energy had covered Ryuk's form like an egg. But soon enough, the cocoon began cracking into pieces, and from within, a hand burst through, followed by several more. Every bit of void energy drained as the cocoon fell apart. Stepping out was none other than Ryuk, half covered in blood and dark energy. But if one looked at his chest, they would notice a pitch-black core that seemed to beat within his heart. It was like a black hole that sucked all surrounding energy directly as Ryuk closed his mouth, his burnt lungs slowly readjusting. But now he had a new source to absorb void energy, and that was his heart. How many days have passed? He asked the second he stepped out, and the system answered. 2 weeks. Congratulations on reaching the initial Dominion stage of void cultivation. It continued, and another pair of notifications flashed before his gaze. Stage notice. You have completed Stage 1, Fangs of the Abyss. Status. Complete. Void nodes. September 99. You have now gained full access to the first 2 mutations. Abyssal Claw. Void Step Legs. Further stages remain locked behind physical compatibility with void energy. 2 more stages remain. The second stage has now been successfully unlocked. Please open the contract grimoire to check out. The system finished as Ryuk sat down on the platform, his veins and bones squirming from pain. But he coldly ignored them as the Void Azura grimoire appeared in his hands, and once more, he began going through its contents. When he reached the page he had stored the last time, and opened onto the next page, he discovered a new set of words had appeared, and a faint smile finally appeared on his lips. The second step of the Void Aura Grimoire. This should allow me to reach even higher levels of void cultivation and unlock new abilities. Ryuk muttered to himself before his eyes narrowed in focus, and he began reading. Stage 2, Spine of the Void Monarch. Theme: if Fangs of the Abyss was about forging the foundation, arms, legs, and heart, then Spine of the Void Monarch focuses on the transformation of the torso and mind, evolving control, void perception, and defensive counteradaptation. Introduction. You have survived the first collapse. Now you must stabilize the storm within. Your spine must hold the void or shatter. This stage rebuilds your center and is a major step into the glimpse of the true power of Void Azuras. Mutation focus.
Torso và spine, lung và brit core.
Eyes of the Abyss. Void node expansion, now 15 total. These next 6 nodes integrate around the spine and head to anchor a central void conduit. Sternum node stabilizes black hole core's overflow. Lung node L/R mutates respiration system, extracts void particles directly from surroundings. Neck node facilitates void voice, allows for projection of disruptive void harmonics. Occipital node, back of skull, enhances void perception and reaction to energy attacks. Inode L/R grants full void vision and adaptive reflex enhancements. Mutations VA abilities unlocked. Mutation 3. Abyssal Gaze Void Truth Eye. The eye that pierces all veils. A shard of the eternal night. The abyss stares back through a single orb of swirling void. A flame with cursed red gold embers. Void Revelation. Through this eye, falsehoods unravel like smoke before the wind. Illusions shatter. Hidden enemies reveal their trembling forms, and secret energies lay bare. Once every 10 minutes, you rend a tear in the fabric of existence, glimpsing beyond the veil into shadowed dimensions where truth hides. No deception can shelter in darkness. For the void truth I seize all, even the lies of gods. Mutation 4 Monarch's Core, Spinal Throne of the Void King. Your spine is no longer bone. It is void metal, forged in star death, crowned with frozen embers. Skill Void Reversal Pulse. Every time you're struck, your body compresses the force and sends it back, stronger. reflects 50% of the physical or energy damage taken, can store one attack and unleash it later with void amplification. You cannot be crippled or stunned. The Monarch's body adapts in real time. They strike you once. You strike back like a collapsing galaxy. Mutation 3, Domain Expansion, Nether Crown, Throne of the Dying Star. You tear open a nebulousized rift, forming a cursed, collapsing void realm ruled by a sentient dying star. This domain is alive. It feeds on hope, light, and sanity. Void Law Rewrite. Every 30 seconds, rewrite a rule of reality inside the domain. Turn spirit energy into decay. Techniques erode users instead. Seal dimensional movement. Teleportation collapses. Reverse light direction. Enemies go blind. Illusions useless. Turn regeneration into corrosion. Cultivation environment. Real world. Only the remnants of collapsed heavens or post-cataclysm zones will suffice. Must find a dead star crater or a place where time fractures naturally. Chrono Ruins. Void Rift option, unlocked from Stage 1 Abysswell Spinefield. An endless terrain of broken spinal towers jutting from floating black masses. Air crackles with soundless screams. Time shifts, perfect for pushing mental endurance and stabilizing void resonance. Cultivation stance. Lie on your back, arms crossed over chest, head tilted upward. Breathe slowly, deeply. Each breath must circulate void into your lungs and then spine. Visualize your spine as a chain of black suns. With each breath, let them ignite in sequence. Just like I guessed, the abilities have improved. And the second stage is like a build-up for the first stage. The hand and leg nodes, leading to the creation of the void claws and void steps. Now I need to create 4 more nodes. With the completion of each, I'll gain a passive ability, while successful completion will unlock 3 more skills and a domain skill. Makes sense since this also corresponds to the Dominion Stage 2. Ryuk mused to himself. He had already initiated the first step, so the second step was more than easy to comprehend. The first thing of priority right now is the environment. And that is the Abysswell Spinefield? He muttered to himself as he looked at the stated cultivation environment before he raised his head. That's a little problematic. How do I find my way in this endless dark void? Should I go left, or right, or straight, or above, or below? Ryuk muttered confusedly as he looked at the pitch-black, endless void around him. But then his gaze sparked with realization when he noticed the platform he had used for his cultivation suddenly began illuminating beneath his feet. He floated off, looking down to sight the bizarre rune that appeared on the platform, further bolstered with the aid of dried blood. And then, pierce. A pitch-dark light erupted from the rune, piercing into the void of the sky, and Ryuk raised his head up to find it continuing, almost as if giving him direction. Without wasting any more seconds, a void vortex appeared before him, and he leapt into it, only to appear 200 meters upwards. But the light continued on, and Ryuk quickly followed after it, using void vortex again and again. And finally, after close to about 10 void vortexes, he arrived where he needed to be, and his brows instantly furrowed as he felt the concentration of void energy in the area. It was 100 times that of the one in the Gravehold spires. But the reason for that was easy to see. His breath caught within his lungs as he took in the view around him. It was an endless terrain, but not filled with grass this time. It was instead filled with floating, ginormous black masses, each skewered with towering, broken spinal columns of some extinct void creatures. It was like the chest area of some monstrous beings, their twisted vertebrae fierce and flailing in the air like dying breaths. On their void-like bones were faint, eerie runic lines Ryuk couldn't understand. The ground didn't exist, only a layering of necrotic bones and ash. The air was incredibly heavy, moving very sluggishly as if liquid iron. Ryuk felt a force pressing into his skull, a pounding headache forming just from being here. "TCH, I hate this place," he muttered, his gaze hardening as it swept the terrain. There was pressure everywhere, and it felt like being sandwiched between 2 opposing force fields, both concentrating their energy to crush him into nothing. It was incredibly suffocating, and the intense death aura that permeated the place wasn't anything to appreciate. It irked his lungs, sending a silent storm of discomfort from sitting around so much death. But these are corpses of void creatures. And not only that, even though these are but corpses, leaving just their bones, the aura oozing from these bones. Apocrypha stage. Every single being in here was at the Apocrypha stage when they were alive. And by my quick scan, there are more than 1,000 of them here, and I didn't even scan to the end. The system flashed before his gaze as Ryuk inhaled from the shock. 1,000 Apocrypha stage beings, all slaughtered completely, with their corpses left to rot in here. They didn't even get a chance to be buried properly. Ryuk muttered to himself as he looked at the black ribs and vertebrae pulsing with void lights. I wonder just who could have been capable of such destructive power. An insane entity, no doubt, he uttered, before his eyes regained their focus. I'm here for a reason, he thought before he floated forward, an incredibly slow movement, but he didn't need to be fast. He just needed to find a good spot, and soon enough he found one. A gigantic black bone that seemed like a plate, moving sluggishly through the terrain. Ryuk used Void Step once more as he appeared on top of it. Even when he sat down, the bone didn't stir at all, showing its incredible mass, which made Ryuk's entire body weight seem almost obsolete. Good. Now I can begin. The stance is much simpler than before, he mused as he read over the cultivation stance once more. Quickly eyeing it thrice in a few seconds, the grimoire disappeared back into the shop space before Ryuk lay his back on the gigantic plate of bone beneath him. His arms moved, crossing over his chest, and his head slowly tilted up, gazing into nothing but the endless void. It begins now. With the stance gotten properly, Ryuk began breathing slowly, yet deeply, as he felt the void energy in the air begin to shift. Then they came forward, tendrils of energy, gathering into long, thick ropes before they appeared before Ryuk, piercing straight into his nose, entering into the lungs, and dispersing into him. The result? Overwhelming pain, along with dark blood oozing out from his nose and lips, barely 3 minutes into the cultivation. But Ryuk redirected his focus instead to forming what was next. The next node ought to be the sternum node, and without wasting a second, he directed his attention off his physical body and pain just enough to make sure he was doing what he had to do right before turning the rest of his attention inward. He watched the absorbed void energy gather around his new heart core, resulting in it overflowing with void energy that trekked through his body. But he quickly diverted them to the sternum, and soon enough, a new node began forming. This time it was far firmer since he had gone through this before. But what he couldn't ignore was the pain. It was worse. Much, much worse. Even after he had cut off his sensory feeling to the outside world, just the stinging agony from the sternum node alone could twist any mortal into insanity. Soon, and I'll be ready. With just a little bit of pain, I'll finally be ready. This is an urgent update from the BBM group of news reporters. In a stunning and unexpected announcement, the humanitarian coalition known as the Starweave Organization has officially been disbanded by its founder, and now ex-peak weave, Astralaxia. The organization, credited with coordinating disaster relief efforts across affected Null areas and saving millions during the Null invasions, ceased all operations this morning. Their relief camps, outreach centers, and regional outposts have begun shutting down, leaving the top factions and other allied organizations scrambling for answers. No official statement has been released explaining the reason for the disbandment, and when reached for comment, the founder, Peakweave Astralea, declined to provide details, stating only that the time has come for change. World leaders and citizens alike are left in confusion, fear, and speculation, as one of the most trusted offices for good in modern times vanishes overnight. It feels like we've lost the sun, said one volunteer in tears. Why would she do this? Stay tuned for more updates to follow, only on the BBM group of news reporters. Dring. The sound of ringing echoed through the silent, dimly lit blue room. The device rang on the table. On the sofa sat a figure, a cup of coffee, now cold, placed to the side. The device kept vibrating on the table before it was eventually shut off, revealing a notification showing 1,700 missed class alerts and 4,500 unresponded messages. Silence continued for a while, as the blue-haired figure looked at the setting sun over the city skyscrapers. Her eyes didn't show emotion, only a quiet storm of buried fury and confusion. Eventually, her hands reached for the coffee. She lifted it, only to frown in annoyance. "Cold?" Aster muttered, placing the cup down again. She picked up the buzzing device, about to cancel the incoming call, when her gaze froze at the name of the incoming call flashing on the screen. "Suras Rakin Drevenox," she whispered, staring at the ringing device. Her expression softened slightly before she finally swiped right to accept the call. "Miss Asteralaxia?" The voice from the other end was mature and calm. "I'm sorry you had to disband your organization," he said, as Astralea rose to her feet and stepped closer to the glass. "Why would you say that? I was the one who disbanded the organization," she replied, her tone firm. A sigh came from the other side. "You didn't disband the Starweave organization, Miss Astralea. I've only worked with you for just over a year, but I know one thing for certain. Such a decision is illogical under any circumstances. Not like you, Miss Astralea. Not after all the hard work, the countless reports, the field testing, and the presents. You wouldn't throw it all away. Sounds more to me like it was a case of no choice." Her hands curled into fists. "But I'm not calling to dwell on pity, Miss Astralea. Right now, I'm in a hall with 24 of the top factions of Endearth. Each one, everyone in this room, wanted to say thank you. Thank you for all the help. The evacuation of 58,000 during the 4th Null invasion. The 472,000 Endearthian civilians evacuated during the 6th Null invasion. The coordination between Eternal Stage experts. The efforts that led to tracking down the Null Rift, thereby saving another 234,000 lives from complete early chaos. All of this would normally fall on our shoulders, and I'll be honest, we're only capable of so much. But ever since the creation of the Starweave organization, all lives usually lost during null descents have dropped drastically, from 70% to 0.5%. The organization may be disbanding, but no one would ever argue that you didn't do everything possible for Endearth, especially as someone who had no origin here, no obligation to care about its survival or fate. For this, we are all grateful, and the Starweave organization shall not be forgotten, for as long as Endearth continues. From beneath the surface of his words, Aster could feel the genuine, almost unearthly support of those present in the room. "The organization may have been dissolved," he continued, "but fear not. We, of the Ascension Alliance, will now take charge of ensuring safe cautionary measures once we've located the next Null Gate. You have my word. No lives will be lost due to the absence of your organization. That," he added, "you can be assured of, Miss Astralaxia." Astralea inhaled deeply, her clenched fist slowly relaxing. "Thank you, Suras Rakin Drevenox. That should be our line, Miss Astralaxia. But one more important piece of news," he said, and Aster instinctively raised her brows. "And what is that?" "We've received an update on the whereabouts of the ex-supreme weave of your organization. It has been confirmed, with approved imagery. And now we're debating our next course of action. I understand you've also been trying to locate him. Hence, the location is being sent now to your device," he said. A notification popped up before Aster, showing the image of a snowy, isolated island, along with the directions. "The top factions have gathered to decide his fate. But before any action is taken, we wanted your insight." Suras Rakin's voice echoed out as Aster closed her eyes, the cold, calm words echoing in her mind. "And that reminds me, if there's anyone you trust among the Ascension Alliance or other factions, then tell them not to come to my island. None of them who come to disturb my peace will return alive. Can I ask for one more favor from you, Suras Rakin Drevenox, as the ex-peak weave of the Starweave organization?" she asked suddenly. Silence fell on the other end of the phone, and she continued. Then please, send none of your experts to his location. I request his forgiveness for his breaking into the Titan Forge foundry, and henceforth, he will be stopped from causing any further disturbances. But please, for all of your good, then send none to that island. There was a collective gasp and a rustle of murmurs echoing behind Sir Azrakan's other end of the phone. An unfolding chaos. But then a throat warm from Sir Azrakan settled the room, restoring calm before he finally spoke his next words. I feel like you, of all people, Miss Astralaxia, must understand the reason why we're taking the matter of ex-Supreme Weave Ryuk pretty seriously. It wasn't just because of him breaking through uninvited to the Titan Forge organization like you think, and pleading for. Top factions like the Titan Forge organization are always under attack by phishing agents and hackers, with losses ranging from millions of star coins on average to billions in extreme cases. According to the losses calculated by the Titan Forge after ex-Supreme Weave Ryuk's appearance, it was discovered that they had lost just about 400,000 star coins from his actions. And most of that money went into the healing bills of the experts who were gravely wounded in the battle. Luckily, they're all back on their feet and no one died. This, compared to the average losses from a phishing attack, is almost inconsequential, wouldn't you say? He asked as Aster faintly hummed. She understood this. Yet, we take this seemingly inconsequential loss with utmost seriousness. Why? Because of the level of threat he, ex-Supreme Weave Ryuk himself, represents. A Null Wanderer is a city-level threat, capable of wiping an entire city off the map. A Null King is a grade-level threat, capable of wiping out one of Endurtha's 5 major grades if care is not taken. But he, ex-Supreme Weave Ryuk, wiped out an entire army of Null Wanderers and even a Null King solo. This places him beyond any grade city threat. He's a planetary-level threat, capable of bringing ruin to the entirety of End Era if care is not taken. And this is just 30% of why we're after him. The 70% goes to Yu's being incapable of understanding his previously well-understood pattern of behaviors. The previous records of Ryuk, we had painted him as a benevolent young man, a cultivation prodigy, with the ability to sacrifice himself in an instant to save the lives of Endiarthians. We have no record of him ever hurting anyone whatsoever, nor any criminal record of any kind. But since the day he ought to have appeared before the world, things have rapidly plummeted, and that too beyond our understanding. He refused to appear before the world on the commemoration event. And on that same day, he broke into the Titan Forge organization, gravely injured the guards, and even the ones that were sent to apprehend him were all beaten to unconsciousness. And he also abducted a girl, whose life or death we have no idea of. To top it all off, he has refused to come forward and give any solid reason as to the motivation behind his actions, which we can mark as an absolute lack of empathy toward this act of insubordination. This course of action, from an entity who is on the brink of planetary threat, is a very bad signal. And that is why we cannot simply turn a blind eye to things. We can't have a living calamity walking over End-Earth and freely among its people. That's suicidal. Therefore, I am afraid the only way we listen to your words, Miss Astralaxia, is if he comes forward and explicitly states the reason for his actions with proof. Sir Azrakan Drevenok said, echoing the minds of the others seated on the high table, as they all listened silently, waiting for an answer from Astralaxia. And she gave them one. You all want to know the reason for his sudden change? She asked. The entirety of End-Earth does, he replied, as Aster lowered her gaze briefly before she took in a deep breath and explained. It's because of the words I spoke to him when he appeared before me, a few minutes from the coronation party. 3 words. A find order. Our conversation began with a quick catch-up, informing him of how the entire world had been glad for his arrival and the saving of End-Earth from the 6th Null invasion, and that the world leaders were a bit skeptical about who he is and his mission. That was when I mentioned to him I had revealed his true identity, and how you responded by sending an invitation card to him, but also mentioned that while the world leaders were speculating on what his aim really was, they had issued a find order for him. It seems like a normal word that should have earned a nod, but the second he heard that word, he got up and left immediately. Mind you, he was well dressed and ready, meaning he had already planned, and his decision to leave was abrupt not only to Enderth but Ryuk himself. But why would he be triggered by such simple words? Sir Azraken voiced out confusedly. I have thought about this too. The reason why that word could have triggered him so much. After making some effort for the past month, I finally found it out. It was because Ryuk interpreted that word, find order, as kill order. Kill order, he said under his breath, as faint murmurs followed from the others. Yes. Exactly a year ago, a certain person, whom I believed we all know, placed a death bounty on Ryuk's head, with the reasoning behind that being that he's a null. Many will argue that was bullshit, but they came for his head nonetheless. Fortunately, he was informed of the ploy by his mentor, Malric Drevenok, who most of you may know by the name Mad White. He asked him to simply lie low for a while until the bounty passes off. That was what led me to take him to that ruin where he got stuck for a year. When Ryuk heard the word, find order, he must have remembered the kill order that was placed on his head by the half-fallen one, the queen of the fallen angels. By my thoughts, I think he must have believed that most of you who sent him an invitation card for the commemoration event knew well he had a kill order issued on his head, but none of you did anything to help him. He feels angered by that. And I can confirm this, judging by his reason for leaving, which to quote was, fake. It's all fake. In short, he considers all of the commemoration party as fake, as you all saw him being hunted down a year ago, even after saving the world from the threat of the Null Wanderers, yet the bounty wasn't taken down and none of you did anything. In the official settings of control, that might seem like something inconsequential. After all, pretense and deceit are unfortunately the way the game is played, and it's become pretty normal. But Ryuk doesn't understand that game, nor does he play it. He saw it as fakeness, and he decided not to be a part of it, Aster said, as silence reigned for a while before Sir Azraken replied. Very well understood, Miss Astralaxia. But that alone doesn't account for why he would burst into the Titan Forge just because of a bounty from a year ago, and give no explanation, does it? A little more investigating helped me find the reason. And that is that Ryuk had a special relationship with the Half-Fallen One, a very special one, specifically with the Half-Fallen's daughter, and soon-to-be queen of the fallen Morgaine Dominaire. For him to have a relationship with Morgaine Dominaire, and then have a death bounty placed on his head by her mother, something must have gone wrong somewhere. I can directly assume the result of that mistrust made Ryuk act like he does. He might possess power, but he's nonetheless just entering his adolescent stage. While we might all be confused by his sudden abnormal behavior, I'm sure a single person reads him like a book and most likely expects every move he makes, and that person is the Half-Fallen One. So if you really want to understand why Ryuk went out of control, then you need to ask the Half-Fallen One what her connection with Ryuk was, and why she placed a death bounty on his head a year ago. My action for you all not to send any of your experts to his island is not because of pity for him or anything. He is the reason why the organization has been dispersed, because he found no reason for it anymore, he said, as gasps drew in the room. And now, Ryuk finds no reasons for all of your organizations, too, nor every single one of your experts. He believes he himself is enough to end the Null War. That can't be. The words echoed from beneath, but Aster continued. I know Ryuk more than you all do, and that he believes himself more of a survivor than a hero. A hero doesn't have a choice but to fight, his meaning tied to the belief of the people he protects or guards. But Ryuk doesn't see himself as that. He sees himself as a survivor, meaning he will never fight a battle that he's not confident of winning. If he believes you all are unneeded in the upcoming war, then he has something that gives him confidence. If you gather all your armies and send them to Ryuk's island to take him, I'm afraid whatever he had in store to defeat the Nulls will be unleashed on your armies instead. And if you all think he's simply bluffing, then remember he took down a Null King that would have taken about 5 of your Eternity experts to defeat. Then it's pretty clear, on a full-on life and death battle, about a half dozen of your experts, including Eternities, will be sent to their graves, and that number is the least result if he's just fighting all alone by himself. If the Ascension Alliance soldiers are slaughtered and Ryuk himself remains in the end, is captured or even killed, the only one who will gain from the chaos is the Nulls. They would be nothing left to stop them, and we will lose the 7th Null invasion. That is why I am pleading for you not to send anyone to his island. I repeat, Ryuk never fights a battle he won't win. He would rather run. And right now, he's not running. If you need answers desperately, then go to the Fallens. They hold all the answers you need. This will be my last message to the world as ex-peak Waveaster of the disbanded Starweave organization. The words rang out loud in one breath, before the signal was cut off. Sirs Raken didn't try to call the number back, and he simply laid down his device before he turned to all of the 24 leaders, whose brows were deeply knitted in thought, thinking about the message they had just received. I believe we all now have a direction to head in now, don't we? Beep. The device beeped once more as Aster's hands dropped down to the ground. Her body leaned against the glass wall, her forehead and palm, feeling the coldness of it. A minute of silence passed before she raised her device to her face and checked out the pop-up that revealed the snow-covered island and the address. Her eyes furrowed as she rose up from her recline on the glass wall. Let's see what he's up to, she mused to herself, as she reached for her long coat that rested on the sofa, put it on before grabbing the doorknob, opening up with one soft jerk before she stepped out of the room, reducing all to silence. After she left, a cover appeared over the glass wall to reduce the lights, but then all of a sudden, it seemed the room was about to get even darker, and then, Splitter, a presence, whose body seemed darker than darkness, slipped out from the shadows in the room, seemingly sitting on the opposite sofa to the one where Aster had sat just moments ago. A love interest named Morgaine Dominaire. Huh? Interesting. In the void ruin rift, the thick air howled with an intense blizzard that shook the entire area, and in a singular layer in this void energy area, there was a singular rotating black hole that began drawing all of the dark aura that covered the ground's masses. All of the void energy present in the abyss spine field was pulled into this shocking black hole, as if being sucked into its singular point. But if one looked at this singular point, they would find a being arms apart, floating above the platform. Hair darker than even darkness itself, with a chest glowing with a shocking absorption force that pulled in all the power. But what was horrifying was that otherworldly mutations appeared every now and then from his body. One time, a single pitch black eye opens on his forehead, another at their neck. At another time, a third hand burst out from their stomach, bringing with it incredible void claws, before hiding away, swirling in another weird mutation from their body. Warning! Sign of lost control over void energy has been noticed. Automatic canceling and rest will now begin for unknown contamination of void cultivation. Error. Abnormal control has been noted as a sign of obligatory speeding of cultivation. System cannot continue to cancel cultivation due to obligatory factor. The system blinked red all over Ryuk's vision, which had turned pitch black, containing two revolving black holes that also pulled in the gathered void energy around him. And Tay's same black hole was appearing on Ryuk's red scaly body as he pulled in more and more void energy. The amount of energy he was currently pulling now would be enough to blow up a pseudo-eternal guard expert countless times over. Ryuk, you've gone overboard. Too overboard. You're trying to speed up your absorption rate and letting loose your void core. If this continues, there will be great consequences, negative and death-threatening. Mutations you cannot foresee are currently happening. You need to stop. He had figured something out. A secret about improving his cultivation speed, and that was to activate his element before cultivating. When Ryuk had wanted to begin comprehending the frost runes, he had simply opened up his domain first, placing his frost energy into use before beginning his cultivation process. And he had noticed how significantly his cultivation had grown. While his intelligence held the major reason for that, he knew very well that if he had not activated the domain, it would have been harder to sink into that stage of comprehension in the first place. While cultivating his void energy now, he noticed an equal peculiarity. And that was, when he activated his void energy while also absorbing void energy into him, it somehow bolstered the ability of the void energy to integrate into him. But that wasn't all. Ryuk had noticed all of the nodes in his body were each like his void core, responsible for drawing in mana into him. And while they drew in void energy, they also tried to stabilize it, to make sure it didn't become too much for his body to handle. But then, he figured he had access to this stabilization through the rune lines that he had drawn on the previous void nodes. And when he had concentrated on those runes, he figured it was like a tap, one that can be used to increase or decrease the flow of void energy into him. The realization hit, and Ryuk had decided to try it out, pushing the runes to their peak. The absorption force was enough to blow forth a backhole, as all the void energy poured into him. The result? A 100x increase in his absorption speed. But the side effect? His body was breaking down from the intense amount of energy that was entering him. His body was struggling to adapt to the scale of energy, and it began disintegrating. But then, Ryuk had figured if it was his body that couldn't handle the influx of energy, then why not activate a stronger body? That was what led him to activate the strongest part of his body, his null transformation. And now, in his transformation, he was able to stop his body from simply disintegrating from too much energy. But what he couldn't stop was the mutation that occasionally rippled off of him, forming weird deformations all over. But they were unbalanced, fanning out as soon as they came. The system was trying to convince him to stop, due to its inability to oversee what was going on anymore. But Ryuk wasn't going to stop. Not until he reached the maximum amount of power his null body could take. Congratulations! Sternum node has been completed, and it had barely been 10 minutes after he received the notification when his null body also began disintegrating, his red scales spilling off into ashes. But then, activate Draconic Overlord, he ordered in an instant as his body rapidly expanded into a hulking, 50-meter-tall titan, covered in glimmering blue scales, his draconic blood overriding that of his null transformation once more. The absorption speed shot through the roof as the notification flashed. Congratulations! Lung node has now been completed. Ryuk's body squirmed from the power as his teeth ground together, space beneath him stretching before shattering into pieces. And once more he felt it again, the feeling disintegrating into nothing, as his blue draconic scales began getting turned into ashes. But he bit down harder as he forced out, "Activate Frostborn Calamity Dragon," he ordered, as his pitch-black eyes gained cataracts of silvery white within them, and an incredible wave of ice froze up to Ryuk's chest, his form rapidly expanding as it tried to become something even more. Yet, arg! A groan of pain left his lips as his transformation was forcefully halted, its energy getting sucked off into inverse. The absorption speed now reached up to a deafening 200x increase, and the notifications began glitching dangerously. Congratulations on forming the cervical node. With each node being completed, node slits was appearing out of Ryuk's skin. It became another vortex that absorbed the incoming energy, further increasing the amount of energy going into him. The next object was the back of his skull, which soon split open, as another node erupted within them. Congratulations on forming the occipital node. The survival rate of the host has dropped down to 5%. If you don't stop now, you're as good as gone. The system notification flashed, and Ryuk gave one last push, tuning his control of every form and node to the max. His Frostborn transformation was instantly broken through, completely, quickly followed by the Draconic Overlord, and then his null transformation folded. Congratulations on forming the last node, the I node. The system notification flashed, as a slit opened up right on Ryuk's forehead, his eyes straining into red and black, and in the next instant, boom! A shocking explosion of void energy as the back hole around him collapsed, sending a wave of power that blasted apart the huge masses present in the void. And then, a figure slowly floated down onto the platform, landing on it, amidst the cracks that enveloped. On his body, various eyes twisted in and out of his neck, chest, and legs, making him resemble an eldritch creature from hell. But unfortunately, he was far too gone to notice the change. Silence. An endless silence. A creeping void that he felt enveloping his mind, crowding over his thoughts. Yet before they swallowed him up completely, his eyes flickered open to a new sight. The sight of a throne hall. A familiar throne hall, where seated were two figures, upright on the thrones as they sighted Ryuk leaning against the world in front of them, heads slightly dropping. And look who's back here once more. The voice of the crimson-scaled dragon rang out as Ryuk slowly raised up his head, looking at both of the Ryuk. Long time, he called out, his voice unusually thick within him, as the red-scaled Ryuk grinned before he pointed. Look at yourself, Ryuk. What do you notice? He said. But then Ryuk chuckled. I noticed you finally called me by my name, Ryuk, he said, as the crimson-scaled dragon's eyes twitched. But then Ryuk turned his head and realized the horror his soul form had become. You went too far. Yeah, I can see that too, Ryuk replied as he looked at himself. The last time he had come into this place, he realized he wasn't truly in his physical body. Instead, it was a soul body that constantly radiated white particles. But now they were something else. Those white particles had now become pitch black. Only now did he understand that those white particles were actually life aura. And now he radiated a very low amount of it. The dark aura that covered him was the same necrotic aura that covered those bones in the Abyssfall Sinfield. Void energy is a powerful energy. Too powerful, too chaotic. And actually, it's a branch of abyssal energy, not apex energy like most people think. The blue-scaled Ryuk said as Ryuk slowly rose to his feet. If cultivated normally, it grants great strength. But any deviation, and it will sap off your life force faster than a blink. You already use an abnormal cultivation technique, judging from how it is trying to change your structure into that of a new race. But then, you just had to do something even more dangerous, making sure it saps even more of your life force. You, of all people, whose life force is already ridiculously low and never grows with cultivation, the blue-scaled Ryuk said, but the red-scaled one cut him off. I like it though. First time in his life, he decided to do something a bit manly. That's how you do it, Ryuk. Find loopholes in cultivation techniques and go beyond what is referred to as normal or good enough. That's the fastest way to win. Right now, your strength is finally worth my attention. That's a good one, it said with its signature insane grin. But then Ryuk's brows furrowed as he looked at his soul body. Below his waist was already pitch black and almost fading. His torso and his right arm had also turned pitch black and lifeless. All that remained was his head, neck, and left arm, along with its left shoulder part, still possessing the white light. How much time do I have left? He asked, and the blue-scaled Ryuk replied. A month. A month from now. And if you still fail to kill the null who possesses your body and integrate one of your body parts to yourself, you'll die, it said, its voice cold and callous as Ryuk's gaze tensed before it gleamed with light. A month, huh? That's more than enough time, he said, as the other Ryuks raised an eyebrow. Have you found him? The null holding one of your organs? The blue-scaled Ryuk asked, as Ryuk shook his head. No, but I can feel it. He's getting closer to me. Very close, he muttered, and with a simple will, Ryuk's will moved out, wrapping around himself, and he disappeared from the throne hall, leaving just the two Ryuks alone in the silence. He can move himself out of his soul space now if he wants. Interesting. To think he would grow so fast, the crimson-scaled Ryuk said with a prideful, evil grin, but the blue-scaled Ryuk had his gaze sharpened in worry instead. He's indeed growing fast. But at what cost? What do you mean, cost? The crimson-scaled one said, as the blue-scaled narrowed his eyes slightly at the space Ryuk had just left. Right now, it didn't feel like I was talking to Ryuk. He sounded more. He more sounded like his... He muttered before his soul body relaxed and slumped back on his throne. It will all be fine if he gets back his body. I just hope he meets a weaker Calamity as his first opponent. Things might get bloody if he meets a stronger Calamity. When Ryuk opened his gaze back to the real world, the first thing he saw was the dark cat over him, its hands seemingly pressing on his chest up and down. Ryuk's eyes squinted, and he found Void. "Void?" he called out, as he stretched his hand to pat its head, but Void instantly shifted away. And when Ryuk's palm passed through the air where the Void should have been, it shattered into pieces all of a sudden, creating a revolving black singularity of chaos in its path. "Hey, careful with the touch. You're like a ticking time bomb right now." Void's words rang out, as Ryuk furrowed his brow at his hand. There was a bit of change. It was covered in patch-black Void runes that danced with particles of Void energy. His gaze slowly returned to his body, and he noticed the same was true. The black Void runes covered every single part of him. But not only that, his gaze found the world to somehow be more magnified than he could normally see. Unconsciously, his hands moved to his neck where he felt something blinking. "Huh!" he muttered out loud, feeling the weird objects. But then, "Here," Void said as something appeared in its hands. It was a mirror, which Ryuk took before turning it to face himself, and immediately his eyes twitched. His face was seemingly the same, but his formerly blue eyes had traces of darkness at their end. But the most shocking part was seen down on his neck at the right and left sides, and close to the back of his neck. A total of 3 blinking pitch-black eyes with swirling Void in them. He had grown 3 eyes from his neck. "Seems like the adverse effects of the mutation. I can't seem to get my strength under my control either. It's very overpowering," he muttered to himself. And for a few seconds he sat in silence as Void watched quietly. Then the swirling Void runes slowly faded from Ryuk's skin, began disappearing back into him, and even the Void eyes on his neck closed up. But they slits on his neck, seemingly like blade wounds at first sight. But Void knew damn well they were no blade runes. They were eyes. "All good," he muttered again as he flexed his now frosty white hands and tapped at the platform beneath him. He saw it didn't crack until the 3rd tap, showing he now had some of his strength under his control. The system notification flashed right after. "Congratulations on reaching the peak Cataclysm stage of Void cultivation. The 2nd stage of the Azura Void Grimoire has been successfully completed. 3 new abilities, including a domain skill, have been awakened." The system notification panel flashed as Ryuk slowly rose to his feet. The entire Abyss spine field seemed to tilt unstably from his simple motion of standing. As Ryuk stood, his gaze lifted to his palms. Then he clenched his hands as a shocking aura burst out into the world, destabilizing gravity. Both his eyes shimmered with a patch of black light. Half of his hair was veiled in Void light, the other glowing with frosty white. Finally, I'm ready," he muttered before withdrawing his aura as his hands unclenched and dropped to his sides. "Why are you here, Void? Did Antares send you to me?" he asked as Void's gaze narrowed into a sharp glint at his figure before he shook his head and walked toward Ryuk. "No. Remember the girl with the perky boobs? Aster. Yeah, she's here, and she badly wants to see you. I can't even stay around her. She seems like she could detonate any second. Hey system, how much time has passed since I arrived in the Abyss spine field?" "Exactly 3 more weeks. You've spent 5 weeks total with this Void cultivation." The system's interface flashed as Ryuk furrowed his brows, then relaxed. His hand moved as he grabbed at the Void and pulled it to the side, tearing open a wormhole that revealed the green grass outside. Come, Void," he said, stepping out of the Void portal, followed tightly around by none other than Void, who walked carefully as they arrived on the island. Ryuk's hand slowly rose as he looked at the rays of sunlight that fell onto his skin, bringing a little bit of stinging pain. He lowered them, then looked at the entire island. It was just as he originally remembered it. The snow had thawed, allowing sunlight and a cold breeze to blow through the area, flapping his clothes. His gaze faintly scanned the entire area before pausing on a particular spot. In the next instant, he took a single step forward. A void ripple appeared beneath his feet, and in that very instant, he vanished into space. When Ryuk reappeared, he stood at the edge of the island. Sitting at the cliff's edge was none other than a blue-haired lady, wearing a hoodie conjoined with a dark cloak. "I didn't know you smoked too?" Ryuk's voice echoed out as Aster took an inhale of the cigarette stick in her hand, exhaling a loud puff of air before she flung the stick away. "I've been here for a week," she responded as Ryuk's brow knitted slightly. "I was busy a bit. Sorry for the delay," he said. "How did you find the place while you were here?" he asked as she clicked her tongue. "Repulsive. I guess you must be finding everything repulsive then. A bit understandable to be fair," he said, watching as Aster brought out another cigarette from her pack before lighting it with her lighter and taking another inhale. Ryuk's brow creased slightly at the action. 1. Because he hated the smell of smoke. He had always hated it. And 2. Because he couldn't understand why she threw her previous smoke away only to light another moment later. She exhaled deeply, leaving a cloud of smoke, before turning the side of her head toward Ryuk and asking, "Any words you have to say?" Ryuk nodded. "Yes. How did the disbanding go?" "Everything sorted out." The cigarette in her hand dispersed to ashes before her hand folded into a fist. "Do you understand, Ryuk, how hard it is to build a 1,000-man faction up from nothing, and turn them into one of the major factions on Endearth? The endless meetings, the endless signatures, the pressure, the headaches, and then to be forced to shut it down just when it's just at the verge of growing into something bigger?" she asked. Ryuk thought about it silently for a minute before shaking his head. "I don't." "Of course you don't. How could I expect a kid to understand?" she mocked, but Ryuk's expression remained unperturbed. "But if there's one thing I do know, it's that we will be fine without the organization in this last invasion." Aster's gaze quivered in anger, and in the next instant, kaboom! A fist covered in blue smashed into Ryuk's head, cracking space into nothing from its power. Yet, Aster clicked her tongue as the image dispersed. It was but an afterimage. She turned behind her to find Ryuk sitting where she had just vanished from. "We will be fine? Have you allowed your power to get into your own head? Face the 7th Null invasion all alone? The Ascension Alliance is now obsolete, along with every top faction? The Starweave organization must be shut down since it's now useless? Do you know, it took hell of dragging myself down, just to make sure your ass is cooped up safe on this godforsaken island and hasn't even been razed the ground yet by the same top factions you now consider obsolete?" she shouted, her voice rising in fury. Ryuk chuckled. "That reminds me, before I left for my void cultivation, I asked Antares for a favor. That is, for him to safeguard the island. And if he faced a problem, he could send Void to warn me about it. When I opened my eyes, I saw Void before me. And for a second, I really wished those people came. I really wished," he said. "Antares sent me to you because he can no longer handle the pressure and the entire island has gone up in smoke," Ryuk said as Aster paused in her motion, watching as a storm suddenly began brewing around them, sending their cloaks flapping wildly. "What would you have done? What could you even do? I guess we'll never know." "Who?" A deep inhale left Aster's lips as she slowly released her clenched fist before asking, "Tell me, Ryuk, how do you intend to handle the coming Null invasion?" she asked, watching as Ryuk slowly turned his head towards her. One eyebrow raised in a questioning look. "The coming Null invasion? Coming?" he repeated, and Aster tilted her head in confusion. "Oh, I guess it makes sense. You don't know. But the Null invasion is already here," he said, watching her scramble for her device in shock, tapping a few buttons before placing it down. "No, it's not. They haven't even discovered the entrance yet?" she asked, as Ryuk chuckled and rose to his feet. "Of course they haven't. They're an obsolete group after all," he said with an unbothered expression, gazing off into the distance. 5 Null portals have opened up in Endearth as we speak, and Grade E is now filled to the brim with Null creatures. Aster's expression furrowed as she reached for her device to gain control of the satellites in Grade E. But that was when the real problem came. She could no longer get the satellite feed anymore. Not because the transmission was blocked, but because there was no signal. That's weird, she muttered to herself, looking up at Ryuk, who was staring back at her with calm, piercing blue eyes. When the fourth null invasion came, you told me the humans stopped getting involved because the scale of the war had surpassed their capabilities. In short, they're now obsolete. My decision to call off your Starweave and declare the other top castes obsolete wasn't because of arrogance or because power got into my head. Isn't the Starweave organization like a spy group, Aster? Going around, finding leaks of abyssal energy in an attempt to predict where the next portal will be? That's what the majority of your people do, isn't it? Only after the gate has been discovered do they begin evacuation, right? He asked, and Aster slowly nodded. Well, what if your group never returned from checking out the place where the Void Gate should have opened? What if they're slaughtered one by one? Silently. Without you ever noticing? What do you mean? She asked quietly. There'll be nothing but regret if your Starweave organization didn't disband a month ago. All of them will be killed one by one, he said, still dispassionate, as Aster's gaze sharpened with confusion. Her hand trembled from his words as she looked at him and realized he didn't seem to be bluffing. He was merely stating facts. This war will be the last, and the Ascension Alliance with the rest of the top factions as a whole is now obsolete. Just like how the humans were rendered obsolete. I figured out they can't do anything to help in this war. They're too weak, and they'll just get killed en masse. He added as he stretched out his hands and a ball of void energy curled before shooting off into the sky above the island, where it exploded in a silent wave of void. Immediately, 3 figures instantly appeared in the air, their eyes scanning around before locking on Ryuk below. In an instant, they descended before him. Isha, Antares, and Rakshasa. Activate Void Vortex, Ryuk commanded, and in the next moment, a gigantic dark vortex, 10 meters wide, spun open in the air, and he calmly turned toward it before asking, "Is anyone interested in knowing where I spent most of my childhood?" He stepped alone into the portal. The group looked at each other wordlessly, before Isha followed after him, then Antares. Rakshasa entered a moment later, and Aster furrowed her brows before she also stepped in with them. For a second, she felt the sensation of traversing through the teleport, but it was an indescribably fleeting experience. And when next she opened her eyes, her breath caught in her chest as she stared at the scene before her. "Impossible," she muttered beneath her breath. Right now, like ants crawling over the land, were nulls. Nulls everywhere her eyes reached. They covered the ground, grotesque forms lined up in perfect unity, standing motionless as if awaiting a command. And in the sky were all manner of horrific, airborne null monstrosities that blotted out the sun, reducing everything to pitch darkness. Her stunned gaze swept across the massive army, and she quickly noticed the most terrifying part. There are 56 null wanderers and 25 null kings. Impossible. Impossible, she muttered again in disbelief. There were barely up to 20 Eternity Stage experts on Endearth, and standing before her were 25 null kings. One had to know Endearth would need at least 4 Eternity Stage experts to take down a single null king, and they only had 20 total. That meant they could only handle about 5 null kings at once. Yet here were 25. Tell me, Aster, do you think the one who gathered an army like this wouldn't have slaughtered all your Starweave spies before they even discovered this place? You think Endearth can last a single second against an army like this? Ryuk asked as Aster raised her head to look at him. His expression was unreadable, but a mocking smile curled on his lips. The same smile she had given him moments ago. But how? Why here? They could have descended onto a large city like Grade B or Grade C and wiped out so many lives with this number. Why the desolate Grade E of all places? She whispered, before her gaze sharpened and she turned toward Ryuk, her expression shifting in dread from the realization. And he confirmed it to her by his smile slowly widening into a grin. They are not here for Endearth anymore. They are here for me. And it seems they came in with all their firepower. So many familiar faces too, Ryuk muttered to himself as his gaze swept through the clouds of nulls floating in the air. At the end, amongst them, twice as large as the rest of the other bird-like nulls, was a null that caught his attention. A null with a peculiar symbol etched into the abyssal depths of its eyes. A symbol that Ryuk could never forget. We finally meet. A spark of pitch-black abyssal light crisscrossed through the eyes of both Ryuk and Morn, the bird null, the moment they laid eyes on each other. A spark that felt as weighty as two beings locked in an eternal stare. Yet it lasted less than a second before the Morn immediately threw its head back and a deafening caw erupted, shaking the eardrums of everyone present with the sonic shockwaves that followed. But its purpose wasn't just the noise. It was a command. In the next instant, Ryuk watched as all the nulls flying in the sky opened their abyssal maws, forming orbs of condensed energy that launched forward, rapidly closing in. From below, various attacks and weapons infused with abyssal energy were hurled upwards toward Ryuk and the others standing in the air. It all blasted out from every direction, engulfing them in a flood of destruction. The gazes of the other immediately lost their calm, reflecting their alarm, but it wasn't without reason. If those attacks struck them directly, they wouldn't walk away unscathed. But before it could reach even half the distance, Ryuk made his move. Awaken Nexus Legion. Instantly, a milky white portal flecked with dots of blue light shimmered beneath Ryuk's feet, spreading outward. From within emerged beings clad in futuristic plating and armor of varying sizes. The moment they stepped out, one singular figure leaped above the rest like a dart through the air. His hands flared upward, conjuring a gigantic shield that rapidly shifted in shape until it formed a circular dome, encapsulating the group in a protective barrier. Boom! The attacks rained down on the barrier without end, the sound nearly tearing the sky apart. But the next command came an instant later. Obliver. It was a simple name, yet the sound of a katana sliding from its sheath drowned out the chaos of the 1,000 attacks. And following that, it was space itself being torn into nothingness. The relentless assault against the barrier came to a screeching halt, just before a mind-piercing scream tore through the air. Unfurl, Ryuk ordered. The shields surrounding them dissolved immediately. When the group opened their eyes once more, gasps of shock escaped their lips. Thousands of bird nulls burned into mid-air cinders, while those below lay sliced into lifeless shapes. Then they saw the figure rising slowly from his slashing motion, his katana slipping back into its sheath. The power, Apocrypha? Astralaxia murmured, her voice trembling beneath her breath as she looked at Ascendant Marshal Obliver. But then, she began noticing something else. They weren't alone. Their group of 4 had become 300 in number. Among them, 10 figures aside from Obliver stood out the most, each commanding presence, unique in both aura and build. They were none other than the Ascendant Generals. What made the group's hearts clench, however, was the overwhelming force radiating from each of them. Eternity. Each of them is at the Eternity stage. And not just at the initial level, they are all at the peak Eternity power level, Aster whispered in awe. They watched as Ryuk extended his hand downward toward the partially recovered nulls, who marched forward with renewed vigor. Then he gave a simple command. Kill them all. The first to move was Obliver. He appeared before the approaching army, and in a heartbeat, 3 heaven-splitting slashes tore out from his blade with unstoppable force, severing thousands of nulls in one swing. The other Ascendant Generals followed right behind him, though their enemies numbered in the hundreds of thousands. What the group witnessed was not a battle. It was an absolute massacre. The army advanced with shields and unique abilities, while the vanguard group seemed designed solely for destruction, and they excelled at it beyond comprehension. The Watchers stood frozen in stunned silence, eyes wide, as the nulls were pushed back, carved into ashes. The small army continued forward relentlessly, carving a path of death and devastation straight through the null horde. Isha, Ryuk called. She turned to look at him. Yes, Ryuk? Void, he said simply. The panther appeared by his side in an instant. "Round up all the flying null beasts. Leave none alive." Ryuk's voice was devoid of warmth, laced only with steel resolve. Void teleported away instantly, appearing in the center of the bird nulls. A 2-meter-long sickle-like claw appeared from his paws, and in one smooth stroke, he severed 3 flying nulls in a single blur before vanishing again, teleporting 10 meters away and repeating the action again and again. Isha soared higher, ascending into the air until she reached the clouds. Roar! An eruption of frost energy burst from her being, followed by an impossibly loud roar that caused the entire battlefield to freeze in place momentarily, shaken by the overwhelming force it carried. Ryuk's head tilted upward, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips as he saw her. "So this is a frost hydra, huh?" he murmured. "Truly majestic." The sky seemed to glow softly, snow-white clouds bursting out from Isha's form. But then, something tore through the radiant clouds of frost. A monstrous creature emerged, its scales made of jagged ice and iron, glinting like a glacier made flesh. Each flap of its 6 gnarled wings sent rippling shockwaves that tore through the air, scattering the flying nulls and sending them plummeting. Its frame was colossal, thick, muscular, and exuding an ancient chill. The wings stretched wide, casting a shadow that swallowed half the null army in darkness. Its 6 claws, each 5 meters long, were hooked and glinted like frost-forged blades sharpened by centuries of wrath. But what drew every eye, what froze not only Astralaxia, but also Rakshasa and Antares themselves, was what stood upon its neck. That is," Aster murmured, unable to conceal her shock, but then she forced, "That is no frost wyvern." 3 heads snarled in unison, each with a distinct form. The left head was jagged, sets of ornate bone jutting from its mouth and brows. Its breath exhaled sheaths of rolling ice blizzards. The middle head was twice as large, bearing silver eyes like churning blizzards, seemingly dead with no emotion, yet ever watching. Icy flames burned out from its maw along with the steam of silver. The right head twisted and hissed, sleeker with smoother horns curving back. Its mouth dripped with pale blue venom that scoured the space, reducing it to cracks from a single touch. When the Isha landed onto the ground, over 1,000 nulls were sent to their deaths, as the earth not only shook but shattered in an abyss, frost blasting outwards. And from its throat, a second roar shook the entire world, followed by an outburst of 3 elements. An icy firestorm seemingly hotter than the dying star. Huge tornadoes of spinning ice tall enough to split the sky. A tsunami of venom thick as a broken dam. It bubbled forward with unbridled power towards the approaching null army as they tried to flee, but were incinerated into nothing, leaving behind only dark ashes. Isha didn't waste a second after that, as she became a mirage, and for the next few seconds, all that could be seen were explosions after explosions unending through the battlefield. Truly, a creature of pure monstrous force. It exceeded my expectations, Ryuk silently thought to himself with a proud smile, before he turned his head and looked at Aster. "Do you still think the top factions would have made that much difference in a war of this scale, Aster?" Ryuk questioned, as Aster inhaled, awestruck by the wave of power before her. If one of Indurtha's entity stage experts stood in the center of that chaos, then their main concern wouldn't be fighting at all. It would be surviving the various shockwaves strong enough to turn null walkers and null wanderers into ashes. "You never told me you had an army ruled by an Apocrypha stage being, nor your frost wyvern pet is actually an evolving frost hydra," she defended. He shrugged. "I was thinking action proves itself louder than words," he replied before taking a step forward and leaning into the distance. "Feel free to join in if you want," he added, before becoming a beam of light that shot into the distance. His aim was clear, and as if it could sense his presence, something also shot forward toward Ryuk with terrifying speed. Something humongous, so colossal it made him seem like an ant. But then Ryuk's eyes erupted into crimson flames, birthing an uncontrollable fury. Finally, I will get to take revenge for Uncle Bob." The thought rang through his head, only making him angrier as his right fist clenched. The void runes reappeared, and in an instant, space around Ryuk's fist shattered to create a singularity around his arm. Burn. An enormous ball of abyssal energy, one whose size would rival that of a mini-star, brewed forth in the maws of Morn, furiously burning toward Ryuk with unbridled power. Every single null on the path of that ball was burned into nothing but ashes without it even touching them. And Ryuk's speed increased even more as his fist jerked back by the side of the head, the singularity fully wrapping around it, and then, at first, there was silence when the black hole surrounding Ryuk's fist touched the wall of the dark ball. But an instant later, the world screamed. Kaboom! Ryuk's fist slammed into the ball of energy, and the clash tore reality apart. A blinding pulse of raw power detonated outward, raising the air, crushing the distant mountains into dust, and vaporizing space itself. The sky split. Not cracked, split. Entire layers of atmosphere peeled back as the wave rushed toward the stratosphere, igniting ozone storms and dragging clouds into its searing core. The ground beneath their collision caved into itself. There was no crater, only a void, a hollowed wound spanning the past few miles wide. For a second, the entire battlefield paused. And everyone conscious being on the battlefield quickly summoned up their defense as they saw the brightness that seemed as if a second sun had suddenly risen. Some of the unluckiest nulls disintegrated before even a hint of it reached them. Winds faster than sound ripped across the field, and the shockwave sent nulls and techno-constructs alike blown off erratically into the air. Time felt distorted, gravity twisting with light bent around the explosion's edge. But in the heart of it all, Ryuk's fist tore onward through the dark pall, slicing forward like an unstoppable sword, as he rushed into the core of destruction, unfazed, his eyes glowing with an abyssal crimson light. The ball exploded into nothing. Yet from the other side, Morn also tore forward with power, as two more wings ripped out from its hideous form, bolstering its speed to a mind-numbing level. It appeared before Ryuk in an instant. The scenery could be described as that of an eagle spreading out its talons towards an ant below, with the intent to skew it apart. Yet Ryuk didn't stop. His second fist exploded into shockwaves of void energy, and then, his body jerked backward, chest growing outwards before both arms tore forward toward the abominable talons with every ounce of power he could summon from his base transformation. Clang! This time, it was the sound of metal clashing against metal as the shockwave solidified for an instant before shattering like glass. But Morn wasn't done. Its beak, jagged and gleaming like the sharpest of blades, and covered in searing abyssal energy, tore downwards, and then it tore through Ryuk's left shoulder like a knife through butter, and dark red blood sprayed into the air. A groan of pain forced itself out of Ryuk's lips from the insanely hot energy, but he bit down amidst the onslaught, as his right fist punched furiously towards the bird's neck. Crack! The sound of bones shattered rang out, before the force catapulted them apart, each skidding across the ruined earth. Boom! Two craters gouged into the ruined landscape, but it hadn't been a full second when they reappeared before each other beneath the ground, and then, kaboom! A third impact sent a tidal wave rocketing skyward, the heavens rippling apart under the strain as the world documented a battle that will forever scar in death for hundreds of years to come. Beneath the Earth's crust, bam! The entire Earth split apart as a figure was sent blasting backward, and it was none other than Ryuk, who felt the world spinning unstoppably before his back finally smashed into a harder ground, halting his motion. In the next instant, he hurriedly jerked his head to the side as a giant claw crashed into where he had just been, blasting open a depth of 10 meters straight into the crust. Almost simultaneously, Morn raised its wing to the side to guard itself, and in an instant, bang! A fist crashed into it from the side, the sound of bone breaking resounding dreadfully. A second wing pierced upwards toward Ryuk's open chest as his hands quickly crossed together. Kaboom! The explosion of power was enough to send him flying upwards as his back dragged across the ground, before he eventually burst out of the ground, rolling over the ground a couple of times before skidding to a stop. A loud, piercing caw echoed through the air, waking up Ryuk as he looked up at the sky to find Morn floating with 4 wings spread wide. Around it, about 10 pitch-black cross-shaped starlight materialized from the empty void. They glowed with an abyssal power before instantly condensing into a pillar of energy that pierced toward Ryuk at the same time. Boom! It smashed into him, carving a massive gouge. But then Ryuk faded off, as the beam of light quickly kept on his running figure, chasing heavily after him. The ground vaporized, wherever the starlight passed, as Ryuk became a blur of cold silvery light, dancing through the beam of starlight before his hands moved to the side. Frost quickly conjured in his grasp, forming a gigantic 5-meter-tall scythe. In an instant, he burst forward even faster, facing one of the starlight beams. The scythe rotated around him before he held it with both hands, and he slashed toward the approaching beam of starlight. Slash! Boom! An explosion of abyssal energy occurred as the beam was split into 2, but not without resistance. Void vortex quickly materialized all around the area as Ryuk became a blur that blurred between each, appearing before the Strelites and cleaving them into nothing before he suddenly stepped into a vortex, disappearing once more. Morn quickly noticed the abnormality as it raised its head just in time to witness a dark vortex open directly above, and from within emerged a gigantic scythe that slashed downward toward its head. Immediately, it flew to the side, dodging the scythe before its jagged wings slammed into Ryuk's back, ripping off pieces of clothes and flesh as he was sent crashing to the ground. It tried to follow up immediately, only to pause a moment later as its void eyes blinked twice, a dark trail of blood flowing down its face. A long, deep mark had appeared from the top of its forehead down to its left eye, pausing just an inch from blinding it. As it shook its head to rid itself of the blood floating towards its eyes, its expression shifted. Its head jerked back as it sensed a vortex materialize behind it once more. Emerging from within was none other than Ryuk, who gripped a spear in his right hand and a scythe in the other. The spear pierced forward towards Morn, who raised its wings to guard, but the spear tore through them, continuing towards its neck. Another wing appeared on the path of the strike, halting it before it reached its neck. An enraged, borderline feral bellow erupted from Ryuk's lips as his veins bulged beneath his arms, which instantly darkened more in shade. He pierced the spear even harder as they both slammed back into the earth's crust, blasting a hole through. Ryuk's left hand moved in an instant as his held scythe cleaved toward Morn's neck, aiming to decapitate with one swift strike. But then, clang! Morn turned its head, its sharp abyssal beak slamming into the edge Ryuk's scythe. Shatter! The weapon was destroyed, shattered into nothing, as 2 more wings burst out from its side and cleaved forward like blades. Ryuk's both arms were cut by the wings, instantly sent flying into the sky and spraying blood. But then, he jumped an inch into the air, before spinning twice as his legs sank downward toward Morn's ribcage, blasting the bird deeper into the ground. He roared like a savage beast as the airspace around his severed arms grew heavy. 2 new arms burst forth, crackling with frost and void energy before. Boom! Hundreds of first mirages materialized around Ryuk as he punched furiously at the monster beneath him. Morn tried to block by calling out new wings, but they were all quickly pulverized into ashes as quickly as they were formed. The remaining fist smashed onto its figure, unblockable, continuing as they both dug down deeper into Indurtha's core before. A loud, eardrum-shattering caw suddenly sent Ryuk's fist pausing in midair as he felt a paralyzing force course through his body. But it lasted only a second before his fist continued its downward path. Yet that 1 second was all Morn needed to escape, flapping its remaining wings and launching itself skyward. Ryuk leapt after it, a void vortex appearing before him, and he immediately entered into it. Morn darted forward only for a void vortex to appear a few meters above it. Its eyes glimmered, not with emotion, but with intelligence, and it opened its beak wide before. Burn! A gigantic ball of abyssal energy formed, and Ryuk stepped out of the void to come face to face with it. He drew back, void energy coating his right arm, forming a blade of shimmering dark energy, while the other was coated in silvery frost. He jerked both arms backward before piercing both towards the orb. Kaboom! A powerful explosion blew him into the air, while Morn was sent flying downward once more. A new void vortex was conjured before him, and he stepped into it and came out the other side, raising his head up to the sight of Morn's back flying toward him. And in the next instant an ice spear, 10 meters in length, coalesced in his hands as he lunged forward, driving it toward Morn, who quickly turned to face him, only to be met with the pointed edge of an ice spear. The roar blasted in its ears as it guarded itself with its wings, but the ice pillar pierced through its wing, skewering through and piercing out its back amidst raining dark blood. But that was only the beginning of its reckoning. 5 more ice spears instantly materialized behind Ryuk, who conjured a vortex on their sharp tips, and the end vortex to appear directly on Morn's body. Instantly, his hands swiped forward, sending all the spears into the vortex, disappearing only to appear on the open vortex before Morn. And then 5 more impalements nailed into the bird null, its blood splattering downward towards Ryuk, who activated void legs, the abyssal claw of a leg latching to the edge of the earth before. Boom! The earth beneath it shook heavily as he burst through the raining blood, activating void claws while slashing towards the neck of the impaled bird. But then, the impaled Morn suddenly released an eardrum-bursting sound, and then he noticed a black ink energy dispersed out of it and shot to the side, just as he appeared before it, and his claws cleaved smoothly through its neck. A severed head shot into the sky, amidst trailing dark blood. But then it all turned to nothing but ashes as Ryuk paused and turned to the side, only to find a new Morn standing there, its head still intact, while its severed head faded into ashes before it reached the earth. It cloned itself at the last second, he thought, stunned. Then he turned to the new Morn, whose lips parted as a ball of energy began forming. You won't use the same move twice. As Ryuk surged forward toward it, his motion was abruptly stopped by a strange sensation. This? A domain? He muttered, startled. But he didn't pause. In an instant, he appeared beneath Morn and pushed outward towards its heart. But he couldn't help but notice the ever-cautious bird didn't try to block at all. At the last instant, Ryuk shifted the punch target from its heart to its stomach instead. Bang! A deafening explosion erupted, but it didn't come from Morn. Instead, Ryuk was sent flying downward, crashing into the earth. And this time, he didn't get back up even after 5 seconds passed. Morn slowly floated down, eyes locked on Ryuk, who remained embedded in the ground as the dust slowly dispersed. His lips parted, dry blood spilling easily. But what drew the eye most was the gigantic gouge on his stomach, almost severing his torso from his waist. For the first time, Ryuk finally realized just how heavy each of his full-powered punches truly was, and the realization made his lips widen into a dark grin. Satisfying, he muttered, before his hands clawed into the ground behind him. His nanobots began piecing together, albeit slowly, repairing the wound until it disappeared, but not without leaving behind a scar. Ryuk's eyes lifted skyward, where he saw the floating Morn, and behind it, a halo. The halo of a pitch-black moon, radiating abyssal energy. The same object reflected in its eyes as it looked down on Ryuk, before it slowly opened its maw. In an instant, a ball shot out so fast it was there before Ryuk could blink, and then, kaboom! It slammed into him as he crossed both hands. His feet dragged along the landscape, his teeth grinding together to resist the scorching energy. But then, his gaze sharpened when he noticed 5 more of these balls already shooting toward him. In a flash, ice coated his hands, shielding him from the scorching abyssal energy, and he conjured a void vortex behind him. He vanished into it, dodging the incoming spheres, and reappeared on the side. Its domain negates distance. Its attacks appear directly in front of me the moment they are conjured. If it summons larger attacks, I won't be able to keep up. What's worse, attacking it is suicide. If I punch it, I blast a hole through myself instead. A domain that renders distance useless for it while redirecting 100% of any attack back to the attacker. Ryuk thought grimly as he watched 10 more of those energy spheres sneak out of the void, surrounding him. But they weren't faster than him, raising his right hand and curling his fingers together. The best way to fight a domain is to unleash a domain. Domain expansion Winter's Solace. In an instant, the ball of energy meandering toward Ryuk seemed to freeze in midair by some mysterious force, and Morn's abyssal moon gaze flickered in disbelief. Could feel its control over its attack slipping, but it just wasn't the attacks. Then the world went silent. The sound was like ice and space shattering. And true to the sound, the darkness of its domain rapidly unraveled as the reality shattered into nothing, giving way to a new expanse. A snow-white, endless plain with surreal hills manifesting from thin air. Snowflakes rained from the sky, enveloped in cracks before they touched the ground. Yet they only added a sense of serene beauty, as peace and tranquility flooded the world. The floating abyssal balls in the air were encased in ice as the snowflakes fell onto them, cracks quickly spreading across the entire sphere. Then, the cracks enveloped the snowflakes themselves before both disintegrated into steamy silver ashes. Morn observed in disbelief as Ryuk's domain covered 60% of the entire world, leaving only a small part around it where its domain still existed. It was safe to say it had lost the battle of domains before it even began. But a domain wasn't its strongest point. In an instant, abyssal wings ripped out from its back, expanding into 7 total. Then 3 of them tore into gigantic claws, dark, jagged talons, and in the next heartbeat, space was shredded apart as Morn blasted forward toward Ryuk. It had chosen to engage in close combat instead, and Ryuk didn't back down. His hands moved to the side, frost covering his palms until they formed massive claws. The ground beneath him shattered into pieces as he burst forward with brutal force, charging toward the null bird with power. But this time something was different, vastly different. For one, the fury in his eyes. They seemed to fade, replaced by a coldness that shook its soul as it stared into those silvery eyes. Their inside seemed broken, so mesmerizing. Morn felt itself lost within their endless, still depths, only awakening from the pain of its wing claws being ripped straight out from its back. Instantly, it turned around, its massive talons cleaving towards Ryuk, who simply took a step back and stretched his hands toward it before clenching to a fist. In an instant, pillars of ice burst forth from behind, tearing into its skin and skewering through. As it watched with wide-open eyes, Ryuk calmly raising his hands upwards, opening his palm to the sky, a ball of frost whose shape morphed into a 5-pointed snowflake, etched with runic lines swirling over its entirety. And for the first time, horror bloomed in its gaze as it noticed the aura. The aura of a primordial rule. The conjuring of the frostflake seemed to take years, but it was done in a heartbeat as Ryuk floated higher and higher into the air, before silently flinging it down toward Morn. Immediately, fury and defiance flashed within the depths of its eyes as more wings and claws sprouted from its being. It pierced forward toward the approaching ball, before its beak opened up, conjuring the most massive amount of abyssal ball it could form. But when all touched the snowflake, their fate was paused mid-step. A sudden, unexplainable stillness followed by an incredibly cold sensation that made Morn lose control of its own attack, leaving it numbed. And finally, fine cracks spread over its attacks and outstretched claws as they dispersed into nothing but snowflakes. And it could only watch with widened horror when the frostflake reached it and carved a hole directly through its body, blasting the pillar of ice that held it into pieces as its body slowly flew down from the ground. I lost! The thought echoed in its head. Yet, it was all so painless, like its death was but a whisper, barely felt, barely heard. But quickly enough, that thought changed, as it watched Ryuk suddenly appear an inch from it, his hands grabbing at its beak, holding it in the air just before it could crash into the ground. For a second, silence seemed to hold on, as if the world was holding its breath. Yet it all unfurled into chaos as it watched crimson-black veins shift out from every inch of Ryuk's face. I'll let you know the meaning of pain. Activate Sovereign Rewriting, Ryuk ordered, A golden pulse appeared all over the airspace around both, and in an instant, his will flooded toward Morn's body. It seeped through the blood and its scales, and then, every single cell in Morn's body suddenly had its structure eroded. But they didn't fade. They became sharp, thorny crystals that dug through every single organ. Ryuk's hands held its beak tightly, yet they couldn't prevent the spine-curling scream of pain that followed, as the claws beneath Morn's back pierced forward Ryuk's head, trying to deal one last heavy blow. But they were paused in midair from sovereign rewriting before their direction violently changed. And then, the ends of the wings pierced into Morn's eyes, blowing its eyeballs into dust, as another skin-crawling scream rang out. Its entire body became a porcupine, as the remaining shards skewered through it, blood crystals piercing out from all over its frame before Ryuk slowly released its body, watching it fall into the air amidst blood-curdling cries. "Burn!" he muttered to himself, as his hand reached forward, a void flame coating it before it swung toward Morn, enshrouding its agonized figure. And then came another wave of agony, a flame that burned not just the body, but the soul itself, an agonizing pain it had never before felt, nor even thought possible. "Burn to ashes too?" Ryuk murmured, watching the null slowly disperse into ashes. And in his eyes, the falling bird image faded away, replaced by an image he could never forget. The image of watching Uncle Bob disperse into ashes. Somehow they both felt so familiar, except that Uncle Bob had disappeared with a prideful smile on his face, while now, there was nothing but screams of pain and sorrow from the fading null. Even after it was long dead and reduced to ashes, the mind-curling screams were still ever present, ringing through the world, reminding it of a pain that exists beyond the physical. Ryuk floated downward moments after, but his knees collapsed a second later, his fingers curled into a fist, tears of blood dripping from both eyes. "Uncle Bob, I've done it. I've gotten revenge for your death. Yet, on both knees, blood dripping from his palms from how tightly he clenched his fists, with tears of red raining down his face, Ryuk realized a bitter truth. In this world, there are some pains never go. That time itself never heals. Pains that are never meant to leave, but to be remembered and relived. And one of those pains was the pain of losing his uncle. The pain of losing Uncle Bob. A pain that would never leave, even after he had killed the one who ended his life. A scar forever imprinted. Silence was all that remained as Ryuk stayed kneeling on the ground, until he lost count of time. But he couldn't care less for anything that happened outside of now. But soon enough he heard the steps. The sound of walking, following the descent of an aura he felt more than familiar. An aura that haunted him every night since Uncle Bob's death. But now he was too tired to care about it. Or maybe too broken to. The footsteps came to a stop before him, pausing just at the ashes of Morn, before a hand moved downward. A skeletal hand that grabbed a handful of Morn's own ashes. "We finally meet, little dark one. Finally," Ryuk muttered beneath his breath as he raised his gaze to the cloaked figure before him. The figure was shrouded in black robes that concealed every detail, crouched low to the ground. One hand gripped a staff wrapped in white bandages, abyssal flames bleeding through the cracks, while the other cradled the fading ashes of Morn, drifting slowly into the wind. "You ever felt the pain? The pain of losing a life?" he asked. Silence consumed the area. The only sound was a haunting howl, a piercing scream radiating from beneath the robes of the figure before him. Morn was a great companion, but death is merely a delayed truth. I saw this coming years ago. Why should I mourn a truth I've already accepted? He replied, lifting his head to meet Ryuk's gaze. From beneath the shadowed hood, a pair of crimson eyes gleamed. They exuded an aura seemingly capable of incinerating the world with sheer intensity. Yet Ryuk searched for something else and failed to find it. He looked for emotion, sadness, anger, joy, but there was nothing. Only emptiness, hollow, lifeless. He turned his eyes away, instead focusing on the skeletal hands peeking from within the dark robes. A sharp glint flashed through Ryuk's gaze as his heart thumped loudly in his chest. "Familiar?" the robed figure asked as Ryuk's stare remained fixed on the bony hands woven into the darkness. "They're mine," he whispered, and a sinister chuckle echoed across the world, slicing through the air like a blade. But Ryuk's face betrayed no change, no reaction. "You mean to say, they used to be yours, but now not anymore. And soon enough your heart, lungs, and brain will cease to be yours too," the figure added with another malevolent laugh, one that could have sent a chill crawling up the spine of even an Apocrypha stage being. But for Ryuk it did absolutely nothing. "You've become weaker," he said all of a sudden, and the laughter stopped dead in its tracks. "I remember the dreams vividly, the nightmares. I can still feel the chase. A fear so great, I couldn't even look at what was chasing me. I used to imagine, if a presence in a dream could make me tremble so, how terrifying would it be to face it in reality? How powerful must such a being be?" Ryuk continued, slowly unfurling his bloodied fingers as he turned to meet those crimson eyes. "But now you stand before me, and I feel nothing, not even a flicker of fear. You must have gotten weaker, far weaker than I remember." In the next instant, kaboom! A tremendous wave of energy exploded outward, colliding head-on with Ryuk. Crack! The earth beneath him shattered instantly, black cracks forming a massive chasm as gravity seemed to increase by over 1,000 times, leaving a seemingly endless abyss where Ryuk formerly sat. The figure slowly floated downward into the abyss, staring at the bottom boy who remained seated, despite the devastation around him. Blood dripped from Ryuk's nose, ears, and eyes, cracks over his skin, leaving a growing puddle of red beneath him. "You have no idea what calamity has just descended upon you, little Dark One," the voice echoed in his ears as Ryuk slowly stretched his broken hand outward and pushed himself upright. He wobbled staggeringly on his feet, droplets of blood splattering onto the ground. "Plit. Plat. The being so powerful, so fearsome in my dreams, the strongest foe I thought I would ever face, is nothing but a thing that rages at truths." Chuckle. A dark laugh escaped Ryuk's lips as the realization struck him. He raised his head and stared up at the figure descending from above, and all he felt was disappointment. "What calamity has descended upon me?" he asked, followed by a deep, ominous laugh. The floating figure paused mid-air, crimson eyes narrowing when it noticed a strange, dark and crimson aura undulating from Ryuk. A singularity began spinning into existence around him. 3 eyes opened on his neck, void runes etching themselves into his flesh. But that wasn't all. From atop Ryuk's forehead, his horns began to elongate, golden dots of light at their tips vanishing, replaced by seething crimson sparks. His body expanded rapidly, violently bursting from its mortal shell to give rise to a 7-meter-tall demon, cloaked in red scales. Claws glowing with a purple energy so dense, they looked sharp enough to tear through a star's core. "He's unlocked his null transformation, and he possesses hurricane energy. He's mastered it?" the cloaked figure thought, eyes fixed on Ryuk's purple claws and terrifying form, watching the singularity collapse in on itself, birthing a black hole around him. The sheer weight of his aura tore the land apart. Craters sank deeper, swallowed whole by the force that surrounded Ryuk. From disdain and uncaring calm, the 7th calamity's expression slowly warped into caution as Ryuk's power continued to surge upward, relentlessly. Then suddenly, crack! A golden bolt of lightning tore from the heavens, crashing down on Ryuk with divine fury. Smoke burst across the battlefield, choking the air, and when it cleared, the 7-meter demonic figure had grown into a 50-meter colossus. A monstrous silhouette sculpted for war with deep blue draconic scales layered over burning crimson ones. "He's awakened his draconic bloodline, too," the figure thought, more stunned than before, as Ryuk's aura skyrocketed even more. Then, his scarlet and crimson hair took on a faint white halo, Frost began creeping over his body, several scales morphing into shimmering white. The seventh calamity stared wide-eyed as another transformation began. But this time, the aura was so great, so dreadful. It shattered the cautious mask on the seventh calamity's face, replacing it with ultimate horror. Host has activated Null Transformation. Host has activated Draconic Overlord. Strain on Host's body has tripled. Host has now activated True Skill _ Frostborn Calamity Dragon Transformation. Strain on the host's body has quadrupled. Stamina is being rapidly drained. All my life, you have shown me nothing but fear. Now, it's my turn. The second he activated Tyrant Form, Frostborn Calamity Dragon skill, the entire abyss shattered into an unending black hole. His humanoid form ruptured as raw, unfiltered apex energy screamed through his veins. A flash of white light instantly drowned everything as the entire world lost its color. Two massive, 30-meter-long wings burst from Ryuk's back before they split and reformed, becoming larger, sharper, and layered with crystallized frost. His entire frame broke and reassembled, each piece forged in a faint cosmic-level aura. Hands twisted into claws the size of mountains. Spines jutted from his back, giving way to a gigantic ice-covered tail, 50 meters in length, whipping behind him like a living weapon. Ryuk was no humanoid. He had turned into a horror, a fusion of dragon and primordial evil. The black hole revolving around him had its temperature dropped to absolute zero, instantly becoming a halo of frost and void that enveloped his figure. Every inch of his frost-red scales shimmered like frozen galaxies. His snout elongated, his body lowered onto all fours, becoming a 60-meter embodiment of death. His eyes blazed with primal draconic fury as the system notification blinked before him. Absolute Transformation skill has been successfully overlapped. All host stats have jumped from 1,500 stat points to 5,000. Beware. This strain, however, cannot be borne for long. The system blinked, but Ryuk turned his furious gaze toward the formless figure before him. This was the person responsible for his horrors. The one who had stolen his body, and he could tell, because the figure's entire skeletal frame was his. He could feel his heart beating as if he had found what he'd lost. And for that reason, Ryuk decided to unleash the deepest madness within him, and strike with a horror that the being before him would never forget. Without wasting another second, his maw opened wide. Special Breath. Cryo-Annihilation Beam. Unleash the true breath of a Frost Calamity Dragon. A wide, continuous beam of pale blue-white energy that erases magic, heat, and life. Melts through dimensional barriers, and anything caught within is erased on an existential level, leaving not even ashes. Cost: half of the host's total stamina. The air screamed in silence as apex energy spiraled downward, condensing into a sphere of blinding blue-white radiance deep in his throat. Then release. A beam exploded forth, a single lance of extinction. The cryo-annihilation beam tore through the world in a straight, unforgiving line toward the seventh calamity, whose dark robes flapped wildly as he watched the beam absorb light and space, erasing them and ceasing them to exist. Instantly, his hands moved. The staff he held was peeled of its bandage, revealing a pitch-black rod brimming with an unholy wave of abyssal energy. With a single chant, he swung the staff downward. Calamitous Abyss Rend. A centric arc of pitch-black color cleaved the sky, clashing headlong into the beam of absolute cold. And then, kaboom! Ice and abyssal flame collided in a detonation that reduced the entirety of Grade E into an absolute dead zone. Reality fractured around the impact. Sound ceased to exist, creating a world-ending silence. Space churned into chaos, unleashing a gigantic black hole. The cryo-annihilation beam dimmed, slowed down from the attack, but it did not stop. The staff only held the attack for 5 seconds before the beam devoured it. Black light flailed violently to resist, but even they were devoured into nothingness. as the seventh calamity's body was blasted through the upper atmosphere, soon breaching the stratosphere, and then he nearly vanished. Space. And beneath, Ryuk watched with cold, impassive eyes, the notification flashing by his side. Stamina. 5,000. Minus 2,500. But in the next instant, both of his wings rose high into the air, and then, flap. A single flap as a powerful blizzard tore through what was formerly Grade E, before Ryuk's silhouette shot through the sky, bypassing all layers of the atmosphere before he arrived in the dark void of space. His gaze sharpened when he saw a distant, dull cosmic body floating nearby, cracks snaking across its surface for miles, and lodged into it was none other than the seventh calamity, slowly digging out of the star's crust. Shock and disbelief painted his skeletal expression as he looked at Ryuk standing in the void before him. But then, anger blazed within his hollow skull-like eyes. Yet before he could say a word, he watched as Ryuk slowly raised his right clawed hand toward the stars above. Signature attack. Glacial Cataclysm. The host summons and hurls down mountain-sized frozen spikes made of crystallized ice, each spike imbued with the force of a falling comet. Cooldown. 1 hour. From the darkness above the seventh calamity, the void of space began to bleed ice. Cracks laced across its entirety, and from those cracks, monoliths of stylized ice began to form, each one the size of enormous mountains, jagged and glamming with glowing runes of ancient frost. They gathered 10, 20, 30. Each spike was larger than a megastructure before Ryuk's claw slapped downwards, and instantly, the mountains of ice were hurled downward toward the seventh calamity, who felt the hands of death rubbing his soul from the power of the attack. And in that instant he made his move. His skeletal form gave rise to the birth of pitch-black abyssal runes, cloaking him in a rolling wave of darkness as he raised his staff. His burning, hollow black eyes flared with abyssal brilliance, and then, even in the absence of air, the voice pierced through the void. Calamitous null skill. Oblivion vortex. The staff began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, faster, and faster, until the very fabric of space trembled. A spiral of pitch-black energy erupted from its tip, twisting into a hungry forest of devouring void. It expanded impossibly wide, reaching to meet the first of the descending spikes, and then, both calamitous skills made contact. The first glacial spear slammed into the swirling black, and was instantly swallowed whole. No shatter, no explosion, just silence and erasure. Then the second came, and then the fifth, and then the 10th. The vortex grew with each devoured glacier, feeding on its divine cold to spin ever faster and darker. The final spike, the largest easily 2 kilometers long, descended with incredible power, and without even reaching the vortex, it had already begun to crack into nothing, showing it would never be able to contain it. But the seventh calamity didn't just stand down. He moved forward as he thrust the staff toward the coming Galaxia. The staff's might was strong enough to destroy its own previous root skill as it slammed into the edge of the falling glacial. And then, boom! A black nova rippled out, ripping the surrounding cosmic body to shreds. Stars blinked out as the ice met the abyss, but lost. When the flash cleared, the seventh calamity hovered, staff smoldering with abyssal energy, his cloak in tatters. But he was alive, staring at Ryuk, whose gaze locked onto him, eyes burning with primal rage, and in the next instant, he faded from where he hovered. When he reappeared, he was right before the seventh calamity, his humongous claws slashing outwards towards him. The size made the seventh calamity resemble a man facing an incoming mountain, but the evil didn't know retreat. His staff yanked backward, elongating to 20 meters in length, all in the span of a blink. And then, bang! It slammed straight into Ryuk's claws, the entire void swelling into havoc, but it was just the beginning. Bang! The attacks continued ceaselessly between them as they became a blur of light that raced through stars. Star bodies occasionally splintered into the void as they tore through them, fighting like two enraged beasts. Neither seemed to tire, continuing forever until an incredibly powerful clash at the heart of a planetary core. It was so powerful that it drove both backwards with enough force to send them flying through the star's heart, ripping its entire body into two, each lodged in half of the remains. Standing atop one of the half-destroyed stars was a towering frost-born calamity dragon. His glacial wings had been torn, one split down the middle and trailing stardust and frozen blood. The once impervious draconic scales that shimmered like star crystals had darkened, seared, and in some places had begun to reveal bubbling nanobots beneath. One of his horns had snapped, jagged at the base, and a third of his spiked tail was missing. His chest, where the draconic core once burned, had now caved in, as if a black hole had struck him point-blank. Veins of dark frost crawled across his body, signs of corrupted abyssal energy from the battle. Every breath steamed with blood, and one of his eyes glazed over and bloodshot. And yet, despite the ruin, his claws dug into the half-severed star body as he pushed himself out of the crater, gaze focused on the other end, where lay the skeletal figure who also tried to slowly crawl out of the chasm. His skeletal frame now floated in ruin. Segments of his rune-engraved armor had been seared open, exposing a cracked backbone etched with ancient curses. His ribcage was caved in as if crushed by the weight of his own staff turned against him. His jaw hung dislocated, twitching with faint will, while one eye socket flickered erratically, the other dim with light having been gouged out, leaving a shimmering frost mist in its place. His left arm was missing, torn off at the shoulder, and his staff floated broken beside him. Its middle core had long been shattered, leaving an empty hole as the dark runes covering the staff bled with sparks. And still Zarkul grinned, with half his skull missing. He ripped himself from the destroyed star's remnants as he stepped forward one pace at a time, his voice ringing loud and clear. To have thought the little dark one, the one who was never meant to exist in the first place, had grown so much. He laughed mockingly as he watched Ryuk rise from the chasm of the stars he was buried in, eyes gleaming in fury. Be mad all you want. Your fate was sealed many, many years ago. Right when your pathetic of a father allowed himself to be blinded by something as fickle as love. Ever since then, his blood has been cursed to eventual ruin. A fall from grace, and you are just an unlucky blood of his who happened to possess what should never have been yours in the first place. He sneered, watching Ryuk's draconic form collapse onto the ground before his transformation faded off, leaving him back in his mortal state. In an instant, Zarkul placed both skeletal hands to form a runic seal, which glowed with unstable abyssal energy before he muttered, "Calamitous null, abyssal reversal," he intoned in the ancient tongue. Ryuk watched as the runic symbol he drew in the air came to envelop his figure, and the broken arms and shattered ribs all began resetting backward, but they never fully healed. Most likely, he had reversed time on itself to some time of their battle, or he didn't have enough energy to fully heal himself. But if one thing was clear, it was that Zarkul now radiated an aura stronger than that of Ryuk's, with fewer wounds. His staff lay thrown to the side as he stepped forward toward Ryuk, walking on the mirrored void with newfound vigor. You cannot bear my ungodly power. All your actions up until now have only delayed your eventual fate, he said, then watched Ryuk's hand press against the ground as he rose to his knees, then stood on trembling legs before crouching. But then his expression of pain turned into a grin of mockery as he looked at the approaching Zarkul, with a smile brimming with disdain and defiance. Pathetic little old thing, bragging to me of his supreme power he got from stealing my own body part. If you think that earlier battle was anything, then think twice. I'm just getting started, Ryuk muttered, and in the next instant, a vial of blue appeared in his hands, and he downed the entire dose before crushing the glass bottle in his palms. A groan left his skin as bizarre blue energy appeared from the cracks and damage in his body, and Zarkul watched the injuries heal as Ryuk's energy returned with even more vigor. But then, Ryuk's left and right hand's fingers slowly moved toward each other, forming a bizarre hand seal before he muttered with an abyssal grin, "Domain expansion! Domain expansion!" The instant those words were spoken, Zarkul's eyes widened as he felt the already silent void descend into an even deeper stillness. He still has enough power to activate a domain? The void trembled instantaneously. A nebulasized rift tore open above the void, threads of starlight wrapping and bleeding in reverse. From within surged a monstrous, collapsing realm. A void-born throne world where gravity had increased 1,000-fold, and the skies were painted in molten red and black. At the center burned a pitch-black dying star, chained behind a fractured throne. Its edges pulsed with malevolence, leaking void fire into the realm. And on that throne sat a humanoid figure. On his head rested a crown of broken halos, hovering above him, etched with ancient symbols across their surface, sending pulses of light rippling through the entire domain. Then, with a stunned expression, Zarkul watched as the seated figure silently unfolded his crossed legs, his body leaning forward with curiosity. Now, where were we? Mutation 3, Domain Expansion, Nether Crown, Throne of the Dying Star. You tear open a nebulasized rift, forming a cursed, collapsing void realm ruled by a sentient dying star. This domain is alive, feeding on hope, light, and sanity. Void Law Rewrite. Every 30 seconds, you can rewrite a rule of reality inside the domain. A petrifying wave of aura sank into Zarkul's core as fear gripped him. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Just by standing within this domain, he felt it gnawing at his spirit, like spectral claws scratching toward his soul's core, dragging dread through his every fiber. He turned instinctively, trying to escape the domain, yet his first step resulted in the entire void shattering into pieces, as Ryuk raised his legs and slammed into the ground beneath him. Activate Draconic Grave March. In an instant, the already suffocating gravity surged several hundredfold. One of Zarkul's knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the platform beneath him. He tried to immediately turn to look at Ryuk, but then the voice echoed out, "May light cease to exist." The words rang through the realm like the cold decree of an unforgiving monarch. Zarkul ran, yet he lost sight of everything. There was nothing. No light, no sound, no space. He tried to look at his own body, but saw nothing, as though his vision had been devoured. In that pitch darkness, only one thing echoed out. Step. The sound of deliberate footsteps. He clenched his teeth and forced himself off the ground, resisting the immense gravity. In a breath, he summoned his will, moving his hand to conjure a runic symbol he remembered. But then, the sharp sound echoed through the domain as Zarkul felt a searing pain in his arms. They were gone. He'd been disarmed, his wrists ripped away before he could conjure anything. In a desperate move, he kicked forward toward the space ahead, but met only empty darkness. He kicked left, then right, but there was only silence. Step. The footsteps continued, unperturbed. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. A dread that wrapped around his mind the longer the darkness endured. "Can you feel it, Zarkul?" The voice rang out suddenly as Zarkul slashed in the direction of the voice, only to meet shadows. "Can you feel your death closing in?" This time, the voice whispered directly into his ears. Zarkul slashed again, his claw rending air, but nothing was there. "Your grand dreams of becoming something more? The lives you sent into the abyss for conquest? Can you feel it all draining away, drifting into the hands of one you referred to as Little Dot, the one whose retreat you mocked, the one you saw as a coward your entire existence? And now, in 3 seconds from now, and you'll be the one dying in fear. Pathetic, is it not?" It rang out again as Zarkul's eye twitched and his breath came in unsteady bursts. Then he heard it. 3 seconds. He instantly recognized the opportunity. And truly, within those 3 seconds, he felt it. A direction, presence, a chance. For a moment, the light that had vanished reappeared within the realm once more. Zarkul's eyes glistened with revelation. He felt the danger that soared from behind him. "You forced me to use it." The unwilling roar rang out as Zarkul twisted in a single motion, his right hand engulfed in bizarre, purple energy that oozed with an aura that didn't resemble either void energy or apex energy. Boom! It surged forth in a palm strike, appearing before Ryuk, whose claws reached for Ryuk's ribs, gnawing for his core. The sound echoed twice, claw and palm, each impaled through the other's back. But then, one of them opened his lips, and from within, dark blood splattered out. Zarkul exhaled and inhaled in heavy gasps, awakening to the horror. He stared at his fading, ruined hands, the ones that tore through Ryuk's chest, the left which his heart ought to be, and Ryuk's, whose claws grazed past but never really touched his core. And he smiled triumphantly. Blood continued pouring from Ryuk's chest as he collapsed to one knee, the claw stuck in his torso. "You lost, little dark one," he whispered victoriously, his voice laced with acidic satisfaction, watching Ryuk's eyes flicker with disbelief and regret. Something in that look made Zarkul's gaze gleam, and in that one moment of victory he revealed a final truth. "You ever wonder why your body parts were seized, bit by bit, shared amongst the 7 calamities?" he asked Ryuk, whose gaze remained lost, blood splattering onto Zarkul's hands. "It's because of the energy every part harbors. When abyssal energy and apex energy meet, 2 opposing forces, they can join together, under very rare exceptions, to form a new energy. An energy called Hurricane, the only energy that allowed an ordinary race to become a Beyonder race. The only energy that can challenge those bastard gods sitting on eternal thrones, watching us as nothing more than playthings, entertainment for their sick boredom. And you, little dark one, possess this energy from your dual bloodline, a bloodline that should never have fused, and never should have existed. And now, to this energy, obtained from your skeletal structure that was ripped off of your unworthy body and bestowed to me, you now end to